Hi, my name is Cecil Walker,
And I'm Adam Frower.
and this is Possibilities. And today we're going to be talking about burnout and what to do about burnout, which I'm sure could be useful to quite a lot of people. But I think, as always, a good place to start is maybe just by laying out definitions of things. What is burnout? What are we talking about when we say someone is dealing with burnout?
Well, what's the answer?
I am waiting patiently for you to tell me.
I knew it was going to come
Yeah.
to this. All right. Well, I think burnout has been defined in lots of different ways, but I think an easy way to talk about it is when there is an emotional, mental, maybe even physical depletion of resources or access to kind of the internal motivation.
Mm-hmm.
I think burnout can be experienced, can have lots of different symptoms, from like a lack of motivation to a sense of feeling depressed to feeling overwhelmed to, lots of different things can impact that. Also, context, I think, can make a big difference around, like, sometimes I can feel burned out within my work setting because there's a lot going on. I feel stressed. There's deadlines coming. Maybe it's a toxic environment. And so it's just really a heavy place to be. But again, I think oftentimes when I experience burnout, there's kind of this like emotional, mental kind of disengagement. And that's an indication of maxed out in some way.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about how context specific it can be, because I do think that's quite particular about burnout. This isn't just depression or someone living a high stress lifestyle or something like that. It's a bit pointed in that some area of their life, something they're engaging with, has led to them being pushed to this point of this is now how they're feeling and how they're reacting. And I guess we usually hear about it in a work context. Your job has led to you being burnt out. You're burnt out with the work that you're doing or the people you have to engage with because of your work, or the stress and the intensity of it, or amount of work, or whatever that might be. But I think you can experience burnout in any of the areas of your life. Maybe it's with dealing with the tension in your family, the conflict in your family. Maybe it's dealing with the political setting around you, the political landscape socially.
I can't imagine why anyone would feel burned out politically.
I've been burnt out for like a decade. But I think, it's very context specific, and that's where you can start to see, I think, a lot of those symptoms that you described starting to show up, where you're, because of your engagement with whatever that thing is, now that's leaving you exhausted, or maybe that's leaving you just feeling like this tension physically inside of you, feels physically in your body. It's hard to focus, it's hard to pay attention, hard to get motivated, like you were saying. You can't bring yourself to give as much as you would like to give or previously had been giving. So I think, that's a great way of describing what burnout is and how it shows up and the context that it can show up in. But then that turns us then to, well, what are you supposed to do about it?
I think that's going to be a longer conversation than like just what is it. If I begin, I think it comes back to a lot of things that we've talked about before. And I think one of the pieces is intentionality. Depending on where the burnout is happening or within which context it's happening, I think we have to turn our intention to, so what do I really want to get out of this encounter or this environment? If it's a work environment, I have to say, okay, so what is my outcome? Oftentimes we use the word desired outcome. What's my desired outcome for working at this place? Maybe it's financial security. Maybe it's a sense of being able to share whatever talents I've got. Maybe it's to, use it as an outlet for my creativity. Once we know kind of like what it is that we're doing and why it is that we're doing it, all of a sudden then we can kind of put it back into context to say, so then how do I get the most out of this? If this is about creativity, what do I need to do to foster creativity? How do I engage in things outside of this context to kind of bolster my creativity? Mm-hmm. How do I set appropriate boundaries within this context in order to maximize creativity? Mm-hmm. And so I think that, like, what do I do about it, I think is really determined on, well, what's the outcome you're hoping for? That outcome then directs or kind of informs the what do I do about it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the first place to begin, is to figure out, like, what do you actually want? What's your desired outcome for this? And let that guide, like, how do you move forward?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a great place to start, because then you can actually begin to try to make some decisions surrounding, what is it you're trying to do about this situation, or where you're trying to get, I guess, in leaving from this situation, which I think means you're then going to turn your attention to some kind of change. Mm-hmm. So you've identified, or you've thought about, what do I really want here? What's the priority? What's the thing that I want? What's the outcome that I'm hoping for? And then now I can start to shift towards, well, what can I do to change this, or what kind of changes can come about in this situation at all? Of course, if you're looking at maybe burnout in your job, it's, well, can I work less, or do a different job, or change how I work, or I think oftentimes people even look at that, the way they're living their life. Can I change something I'm doing outside of work that will improve how I'm feeling, that'll give me more motivation, more energy to do the difficult things that I have to do? So yeah, I think in finding the direction that you want to go in, that kind of sets you up to then begin to start to shift some things, so that you can say, well, if I turn some of these things, move some of these things around, will that then give me a bit more of what this thing is that I'm wanting, that, whatever the outcome is that I'm wanting? Or can I give up some things, make some big changes that will get me still what the outcome is that I want, but I might have been able to remove, what was burning me out in the first place?
Yeah, it's interesting, because as you were talking, a scenario within my own family kind of came back to my memory. So my wife, Becca, is an amazing cook. She makes food from around the world. And just the way that our work distribution has fallen, she tends to make dinner most nights. And last week, our youngest daughter said to her, I'm so sick of having the same 10 things over and over. And
when you're in charge of making them, you would never say that. Right. To me, I'll eat the same 2 things.
And the reality is, my wife does not make the same 10 things over and over. But again, to a teenager, it's like we're eating the same things over and over. And my wife constantly has been saying, like, for our whole relationship, she has kind of said, like, I really hate deciding what to make for dinner. She doesn't really care about the making dinner, but the decision about what to make she doesn't like. And so then to be confronted with our daughter who's like, the decisions you've been making, they're inadequate and insufficient. It just kind of like hit at that point of like, I don't like this task. And probably she would say, I feel burned out from having to like choose every day what to make. And so she kind of came to me and she was like, can you believe what just happened? And I kind of chuckled because I knew that it wasn't true. But nonetheless, I don't think that helped that much. But we then got to have a conversation around like, okay, so how do you change the factors so that you don't feel burned out by this, so that she doesn't, her feedback doesn't feel like criticism. And one of the things that we talked about is like, okay, so what's our goal of parenting? And our goal of parenting is to like enable people, to help them to get a voice, to be able to advocate for themselves. And here our daughter is like advocating for herself in a way that we don't really appreciate. But we had to acknowledge, okay, there's something beneficial about her advocating in this way. And so in some sense, then we had to say, so then how do we continue to parent the way we want to parent and make some movements so that Becca feels less burned out about having to make decisions about what to make for dinner? And so one of the things that came up is we said, well, let's go back to our daughter and say, okay, so if you're sick of the things we've been eating, you pick. So we all sat down with different cookbooks, with different recipes, and she's flipping through and she's saying, well, this looks good. And if I had to say, I would say it was really just like a chicken dish on top of rice, which we have had before. It was a different kind of chicken dish. But because she got to choose it, it didn't feel like the same thing again, right? So it was chicken cacciatore. So we had chicken cacciatore. That's a hard thing to say. But another thing, then she was like, okay, well, I want to have breakfast foods for dinner. And we've had waffles for dinner. You've been at our house where we've had waffles for dinner or eggs for dinner, or we've had breakfast foods for dinner. But what we kind of gravitated to instead was, because it's fall, we had pumpkin pancakes, which I didn't even know were a thing, with apple cider syrup, which again, who knew that was a thing? But so it was a variation on a theme, but it was a variety enough. It gave Julia an opportunity to say, well, I want this. It took the burden off of Becca to have to choose, but it also helped us to be able to say, like, we want to parent in a way where they get choice, where they get a say, where they can contribute to what this is. And so I think sometimes that was a really long way to get to the point. The point is, I think when you take a step back and you say, like, what are our values? Our values are not to say, like, fine, you make dinner then, but our values are to say, okay, how do we involve you in the decision making? How do we let you have a voice in this process? How do we remove some burden from somebody who feels like they have to do everything? And so I think sometimes the way that we manage burnout is we take the step back and we say, like, what's supposed to be happening here? Whose roles are these? How do we get more people involved? I think sometimes burnout feels like burnout because one person feels like, I'm shouldering the burden of this process. And just simply by shifting it out a bit, letting Julia choose a few things, I chose a few things to eat, all of a sudden Becca was like, yeah, this is way better. I know all the things that I'm going to make this week, and it feels easy, it feels light. It doesn't feel like criticism anymore. And so I think taking that step back and saying, like, what are we trying to accomplish? One, how do we involve more people, share the responsibilities a bit is another way to kind of alleviate it. But then also I think just being open to a new process and just saying, like, just because it's the way that we've always done it doesn't mean that that's the way we have to do it. And so I think that gets to your point of, like, sometimes this is just about change and saying, like, how do we initiate some change into a process that maybe we've just gotten used to?
Yeah, I think that example really shows not only about the process of doing something about, what's wrong there, but the function of the burnout in the beginning, in the first place, is to say this isn't working as well as it maybe could, or maybe there's a new system or something that could be more beneficial, that could serve more of the things that you're wanting here. Or maybe even just the mindset of the way that you're going about things. If you look at it as some type of family experience or a learning opportunity or something like that, then it's different in approaching that. It's still something work, but it's different. And I think the same could apply for any kind of burnout that someone else is experiencing, that the burnout itself tells you, okay, there's something different we could be doing here. This isn't serving us in the way that maybe something else could serve us better. And I know the quintessential examples of when people are burnt out by their job, either maybe that isn't the job for you. That's one way I think of looking at it, or maybe the way you're doing that job isn't the best way of doing that job. Maybe the way you're thinking about that job, you're framing it, you're psychologically experiencing it, isn't the best way to do that. The people you're doing that job with aren't the right people or the right place, right company, right whatever. Or the way that you spend your time outside of that job isn't the right way that you should be spending that time. And I don't mean to make it so black and white of right and wrong, but I think it's kind of like, when you feel hungry or you feel tired, it's telling you that we need to do something. There's something we got to change about this situation. And I think that's kind of how we should interpret burnout in the first place. And then when we start to follow these steps that you kind of laid out, in that example and earlier of identifying, well, what's important here? What's the thing that I want from this? And then what can I do to kind of change and shift and get that kind of a thing? Things like, I assume, I'm not a doctor, but I think things like burnout come up because I think it's like, people can ignore a check engine light, very literally, but also even, in their metaphorical sense of a check engine light. But it's hard to ignore the, like, you can't even really get out of bed. You can't even get yourself to do the thing that you're apparently supposed to be responsible for doing. Or it feels like a huge burden to do that. It feels like the brakes are on when you're trying to approach doing that thing. And I think it's so hard to ignore that because it's trying to tell you something. It's trying to give you a sign of something's gotta change, or you at least need to look around and pay attention to what's going on here. There's something in front of you that you're apparently missing if you're seeing that kind of pushback in terms of trying to do the thing that you typically are doing.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me also of another scenario. So, I have a son, Toby, and he is in a calculus class. And he's always been a math person. Mm-hmm. He loves math. And this semester, he has really kind of been struggling with math. And one of the things, and he just doesn't want to do it. He doesn't. And one of the things that I have realized, he's made abundantly clear, is that it's actually not the math, but it's the teacher that is the rub, right? And so his grades have kind of been dipping a bit, and that's, I think, one of the signs of burnout is I've put up with this enough that again, my motivation isn't there, my dedication to this, my natural ability just is not shining through. You're not getting out of me what you could possibly get out of me. And so you can kind of see all those signs of burnout. And one of the things, so then as a parent, you're left with he can't not go to school. He can't just all of a sudden change teachers. As much as he wants to tell that teacher off, he can't really tell that teacher off. So it kind of feels I think a lot of times where burnout feels is you're hemmed in. You are out of control, other people have control or the circumstances have control. And so it begs the question, what do you do when you feel like the control is limited? I have very little say in this situation. And one of the things that seemingly has helped, last night, he was running through this whole series. They're now getting into all of this. I don't know what they really call it. I call it the circle of truth, even though that's not what it's called at all. But it's this whole proofs around a circle and why things are the circle and all of this kind of stuff. And for about 45 minutes last night, he is rattling off to me meaningless equations that go around the circle. And in my parent head, I'm this is the most boring thing that you could possibly be reciting. It's just numbers and square roots and pies and all the things. And I'm I don't use calculus in my work, and I don't really care about it. But something has caught his interest again in this whole math thing. So as he's meaningly reciting all this stuff to me, I'm thinking what did we do to make this shift to all of a sudden now he's excited and he wants to tell me all these things. And so I stopped listening to him and I started running through my head what did we do to get to this point? And one of the things that I remember that we did is we said in some sense, wait a second, step back. Why is this content important? And this is a kid who wants to be an engineer and who wants to, go on to create some things and do some things. And I said to him, so if you want to do all of that, but you have this teacher that you don't like, how do you have to engage with this material? And he was well, and we talked a lot about how math builds. That if he lets this teacher get in his way of learning this content, it might ultimately get in his way of learning other content, which might get in his way of being able to pursue what he really wants to pursue. And so putting it back into the vision of why am I doing this in the first place? Why is this meaningful to me? All of a sudden, he didn't care about what he thinks his teacher is a lousy teacher and she doesn't teach much. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, he pulled out his computer and started learning all of this stuff on his own. And started doing practice exercises on his own because he was well, if she's not going to give it to me, I'll get it a different way. And then I had to sit through 45 minutes of torture because he had learned all of this on his own. And so I think that's the other thing that I would say is like when we're trying to deal with burnout, sometimes we get into this like narrowed perspective of like, I'm hemmed in. All of this joy, excitement, it's out of my control. Something has come in and squashed it, and I can't do anything to get it back. And I think once we take that step back and we say, so like, why am I really doing this? How can I get what I want out of this? I can come up with workarounds. And for him, it was like, pull out the computer and do some work on your own. Teach yourself how to do this. Recite to your poor old dad for 45 minutes. And that became his workaround. And you could like see the excitement. I have no idea what he's talking about, but like there is excitement every time like square root 2 over pi came up. And the fact that you could like literally see him work himself around the entire circle, tell you every single equation. By the time he ended it, it's like pure joy and pure torture. But it didn't matter all of a sudden that his teacher had hemmed in his learning experience or didn't teach him in a way that he felt like was important to him. Or so the circumstances that led to the burnout all of a sudden became irrelevant because he found a different way to find the joy. And I think sometimes it just takes that stepping back to get to that point.
Yeah, if he's going to be an engineer, you're going to have way more of those kinds of conversations then. So you're not done. But that, I think, really shows how, yes, like you said, the burnout and the experience of the burnout, whatever those symptoms are, can kind of paint this picture for you of, of a lack of power or control over your situation. You're kind of stuck with this and you've got to just deal with it. And I think, unfortunately, maybe sometimes people do believe that, too, that they are stuck and they just have to put up with how hard this is. Or it says something negative about them if they can't, continue to put up with how hard it is. But the truth is that then means that something different needs to happen so that you can see some other kind of feedback that tells you this is working. So instead of feeling burnt out, you feel pleased with what's going on, or you feel like there's some purpose in the thing that you're doing. You feel like you're actually learning things. Maybe your grades can start to reflect that. It really starts to show the possibilities that might not even be hidden, might not even be visible. They might have been hidden before. But there's something. This is an unconditional thing that you can try to still achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve without waiting for the situation itself to just give that to you, or for one day the burnout to just stop and then give up. I think we have to kind of take that as I got to look for another way around this. Or I got to look for how do I continue to construct the thing that I want, even if this situation or the people around me or whatever it is isn't giving that to me inherently.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that I also have a question about is what happens, like in Toby's case, right? He can choose to learn it some other way. But if I'm at work or I'm at home and I have like 3 little toddlers and like I can't just check out, I can't just like leave them to their own devices. If I really am like, this is where I am, this is where I'm stuck. If it really feels like I have no control over changing this situation, what then? How do you manage it? How do you figure out, like, what if you see no end in sight and you've lost hope that your situation could change?
Well, I think actually somehow in your question you gave a bit of the answer too. It's the not. Oh, you're trying to stump me. That's what you're trying to.
Next time I'm gonna get you.
I think it's the not being able to see the end in sight that really contributes to that hopelessness or that sense of I'm stuck in this situation. And, now the options for what to do seem extremely limited, if not, non-existent. There's nothing I can do about this situation. Or the things I can do, I don't like those options because they come with downsides or they don't give me enough of what I want. So it's that I think keeps you kind of boxed into that scenario. But if you could begin to try to see an end, if you could begin to try to have a vision for, well, where exactly am I trying to get? What's the thing I actually really want here, which is how we started this conversation. I think that then begins to open up the possibilities, the options for how do you get there. It's like, I know I got to get to that other side, and I'm currently on this side, and there's a bit of a hazy maze between us. But now I can start to begin to navigate that because I know where I'm trying to get to. And I think that's how, any major problem really gets solved, is you at least need to know, well, what's the solving it even mean? What does it mean if we were somehow outside of this problem, if we were somehow able to get beyond this predicament of dealing with whatever this tough stuff is, or whatever this kind of problematic thing is. And I think every time, we hear these stories about how people ingeniously solved problems, even if it was with a really simple solution or something like that, like I'm thinking of, for some reason, the first example that comes to mind is these researchers who wanted people to take the stairs more than the elevator. It seems like such a simple problem, and maybe gets a simple solution or something like that. But when they started to think about it, it felt like, well, there's nothing we really can do to make people take the stairs instead of taking the elevator. I think they started with trying to put up signs that said you could burn this many calories if you completely switched from elevator to stairs. Here's the effects it'll have on your health if you change to the stairs. It can have this effect on your mood. You change from the elevator to the stairs. They tried all these things to try to convince people that the stairs would be better, and it had close to no effect. But when they started to think about, well, what's the thing that we really want? We do want these positive outcomes, but we want people to make the decision for themselves to just say the elevator is not worth it, and the stairs will be much more worth it. It's worth my time. It's worth the effort I put into it. And so when they really looked through the lens of, we want people to make that decision, well, then maybe all we have to do is make it feel more worth it, and maybe even make the elevator feel less worth it. And so what they did was they delayed the time it took for the elevator to arrive. So if you were going to take the elevator, when you press the button, it would take longer for the elevator to arrive. And I don't remember the numbers, but some large percentage of people then started to take the stairs. I'm sure there's still people who were willing to wait. But it was motivating enough that it made people stop and think about their decision of, this isn't a mindless, just hop on the elevator thing anymore. This is this is spending some time. This is spending, I'm beginning to have to make an actually effortful decision to take the elevator if I'm going to have to sit here for this amount of time. And so now that I'm actively engaging with the decision-making process, I think I actually would prefer to take the stairs. Now that information about my health is more relevant, but also I know my time is more relevant too. And so I think this is such a long-winded way of answering your original question.
I've already given 2 really long stories.
I think it's when you begin to start to reach forward and say, well, where are we trying to go? What's the thing we're trying to accomplish? What's the new scenario we're trying to construct? When you look through that kind of when you look down that pathway and say, well, what do I need to do to get me to there? Then you can begin to see there are some other possibilities. It's hard to prescribe that from outside of the context, or to say, if you ever find yourself in this situation, do this thing. Because I think it requires being in the situation, and it requires the constraint of, well, here's all the stuff that's really tough or really wrong or really difficult, but here's the outcome that I want. And when I combine all that together and try to stretch myself to that outcome, then you come up with, well, what's that unique kind of way around that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about 2 things. One of the things that you made me think of was, I actually thought you were going to talk about something different about the stairs, because the study that I read, actually, they said, what if we change people's relationship with the stairs? Instead of it being a burden or a method of transportation, we turn it into something that is enjoyable. And they actually ended up putting these big piano keys on the stairs. So as you walked up the stairs or down the stairs, it would make music. Each key was on a different step.
I don't know if I'm always in the mood to...
No, it was only half of the stairs.
Okay.
So you could walk on the non-piano side of the... But one of the things that they noticed is that it really changed how much time people spent on the stairs. It changed... They went up and down. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just from bottom to top or top to bottom, but in some sense they started to make a tune of it, or they tried to have a competition with each other, or they tried to play chopsticks, which is apparently really hard on stairs. But when you change the relationship to, instead of this being a task or something of drudgery, now it is entertainment. Now it is all of a sudden they actually spent longer on the stairs than they would have if they had just walked up the stairs. And so I think that's another like key is a lot of this is about meaning making. Sometimes when we feel burned out, it's because we're attributing this to like boredom or to being controlled or being confined in this place or whatever. And I think, again, one of the things we can do to change our relationship with it is to change what it means to engage in it. In this method, it changed, a method of movement up the stairs to a sense of satisfaction, of joy, of interaction with one another. And so I think we can kind of take that step back and say, like, how do I change what this is? Maybe this is a way for me to like spread some joy to other people who feel burned out or something like that. So I think that's one thing that I was thinking about. The other thing I was thinking about is that oftentimes people talk about like, how do you deal with burnout is you do self-care. You insert self-care into your life. And I think, although that's kind of true, and it's what I'm going to say is kind of related to that, I think that there's something problematic about just doing self-care, because you don't then do anything about the circumstance of what's going on. You just say, okay, I'm going to go deal with torture, and then I'll come home and I'll deal with the ramifications by taking care of myself. We have to switch it in a little bit of a way. One, we have to prepare in advance, right? So I think that in some sense, we have to mentally get ourselves to a place where we, again, change the meaning of that, change why it is that I'm doing that. I'm going to fulfill a purpose. If I go do this thing, I'm this kind of a person. Mm-hmm. So we change our relationship to what it means. And I think that's some forethought rather than after, which I think oftentimes self-care comes after the fact. But the other thing that I would say is we have to find joy. We have to find happiness, satisfaction somewhere. And then we have to let that satisfaction spill over. Oftentimes, one of the research studies too that I talked about, or that I've read about, is that oftentimes on Monday when people go back to work, they dread going back to work on Monday. Sunday night comes and they get sick to their stomach, or they start to panic, or they start to worry, and they're like, I don't want to go back to this thing that I do all week. And yet if you look at what they're thinking about on Friday morning, then the meaning making is, I only have one more day until I'm free, till I get to do what I want to do. And so the only difference is my mindset going into it. And so I think that's the other thing that I would say is that much of what contributes to burnout is our perception of it. Is this the beginning of a long week, or is this the beginning of a weekend? And I think that's what I would say is like we have to do things that help us to find joy, because when we're in a joyful place, then our perception changes. Then the thing that seems really horrible doesn't seem so horrible. Going back to my son Toby, he has a math quiz today. And sometimes on days when he has a math quiz, he's like, I don't want to go. Can I skip? Can I stay home? Can I? And because I sat through 45 minutes worth of torture last night of reciting the entire magic circle, again, that's not the real name of it. I changed the circle something to anything I want. Circle of life. It's been a whole thing. But because he spent all of that time changing his relationship to the equations, he knows it all. And he's like, if I write this out, it's so easy. He's actually anticipating going to school today. And he's like, I will ace that quiz because I know everything perfectly. There is nothing different about it except for the fact that he knows it. He feels confident in it. He feels like it's worthwhile. So now what seemed like drudgery before is actually like, this is a moment for me to go show everybody what it is that I know and accomplish. And so I think that's the other piece is like, when we develop competency, when we develop joy, when we feel this sense of satisfaction, that's going to spill over. And I think the tendency when we feel burned out is to do nothing, to sit on the couch, to watch TV, to eat ice cream, to like just completely veg. And the reality is we're just contributing to our own burnout. Whereas if you can do something to feel excitement, you can do something to feel alive again, then that is what's going to bleed over into those other circumstances. So I think with some forethought, we can change other aspects of our life, which will then bleed over.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And I particularly like the part where you're talking about like, this tendency that people have to leave what's causing the burnout, but then try to self-care themselves away from the burnout somehow. And it's like trying to put out a fire, but you're not really putting out what's causing the fire. You're just kind of like, dampening the edges around the fire, maybe. And what you really should be doing is trying to, I guess, see what this burnout is about and go straight to the source, go straight to the, where is it that, like you said, I could use more joy or a different perspective or something, fundamentally that needs to change so that the burnout isn't being produced in the first place. And that I don't have to apply self-care to the burnout. I just have to do something that changes the fact that burnout is existing at all. Anything else you would add to what we do about burnout?
Nope, I'm being for real this time. Usually I'm like, well, maybe I know, but yes.
Yeah.
Nope, this time no,
Okay.
we're good.
This time no. You're burnt out on burnout. Okay.
Yep.
Well, then I guess that's everything we need to know about burnout.
Awesome. So if you feel like you learned something from this conversation, we would love to hear about it. Put it in the chat. If you feel like you know people who could benefit from kind of these considerations about how to manage burnout, please share it with them. We would really appreciate it. But until next time, go enjoy life. Find joy.